Germany's great military reboot has arrived, and this is an article that came out recently. Very interesting. People are saying this. Now, I saw this back in 2016. I was telling people about this, but now you're seeing more and more people figuring this stuff out and saying, oh, look, Germany is reviving. So it says here that Chancellor Olaf Scholz previously established a one-off 100 billion euro defense fund in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, yet this measure was limited by constitutional debt restrictions. That's what I was talking about when I said that Germany has all these bureaucratic impediments on its military spending. The Germans just removed the hindrance, the economic hindrance. So it says here that Merz's new coalition has unveiled a massive 500 billion euro fund, significantly boosting military and infrastructure investment with defense spending exempt from previous constitutional constraints. So it says here that this reform promises not only a revitalized German military, but also economic growth through enhanced productivity. In other words, let's bring German industry back, because German industry right now it's lost its oomph. You have Volkswagen declining. But do you know what's increasing in Germany? Rheinmetall. Defense companies are increasing. Why is that? Because militarism is coming back. You can see the writing on the wall. And if people want to deny it, they either just aren't informed or they're just too evil to recognize this. Because you have people who have this obsession with Germany. Germany, well, no, they're great. Oh, they don't want to acknowledge the obvious. So they want to boost industry back. And we know if there's one thing that everyone knows about the Germans is that they are a very industrial people. They are an industrious people. They have the culture to bring back industry, to revive industry, because German industry has been, it's been declining. For example, I heard that the train stations in Germany don't function as efficiently as they used to. And so the German government wants this to all change. They want to revive and reform the industrial culture of Germany. They want to bring it back. And industrialization will lead to remilitarization. 100%. We're already seeing this. So it says here that they want to enhance productivity, technological advancement, and innovation. That's all industry, marking a strategic shift away from Germany's long-standing defense austerity. So they have ended austerity, and you're going to see German military spending go up to the roof. You're going to see it. Massive spending. So it says here that Chancellor Angela Merkel's tenure at the helm saw German lawmakers enshrine in law a debt brake, essentially a federal rule forbidding surplus spending in excess of 0.35% of GDP. Germany, one of the world's most fiscally solid and financially responsible countries with a sterling credit rate to boot, essentially tied one hand behind its back by forbidding virtually any excess spending. And that is now ending, everyone. One exception that lifted the rule was for emergencies put into practice most recently during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the debt brake rule was suspended to combat the virus. So this began with COVID. During COVID, they said, okay, let's not put any limits on spending when it comes to fighting the virus. Now, the same logic is being applied to fighting the Russians. They're essentially saying the Russians are now the virus, the human virus, and we have to fight this virus. How are we going to do this? The same way we fought COVID, we're going to end limits on military spending. So it says here that it dwarfs the previous one-off 100 billion euro fund in both scope and sustainability. So $100 billion or 100 billion euros for a European military, especially a country like Germany, is not really serious. That's not, it was a big shift. It definitely marked a shift in the zeitgeist for Germany. That's true. But America spends 8 times that every year. America spends about 800 billion USD on its military. So as the article already specifies, Germany saying no limits on military spending dwarfs what Olaf Scholz did back in 2022 when he said, we're going to have this big turning point and we're going to spend $100 billion on defense. That was just the marker of the beginning. Now they're talking about 500 billion USD. That's pretty serious. But now they're talking about no limits on military spending. So what is all that's left to do? The only thing that's left is for Germany to have a Hitler. And when that happens, watch out. Watch out. In addition to increased spending aid to Ukraine, the incoming Chancellor's coalition negotiations yielded a 500 billion euro special fund tied to defense and infrastructure investment. While a welcome boost to the Bundeswehr and German defense industry, perhaps more important is the future of defense spending. The future. The Merz-led government amended the Constitution. How did it amend the Constitution? It said no limits on military spending. It exempted defense spending from the constitutionally enshrined debt brake. German defense spending will no longer be tied to minuscule percentages of GDP, but allowed to increase as necessity arises. That's crazy. This is huge. German defense spending will no longer be... I got to read this again. German defense spending will no longer be tied to minuscule percentages. 2%, 1%, 1.5%, 3%. No. That's going to end. Now it's allowed to increase that percentage as necessity arises. So what is that going to look like? Oh, well, let's see. Let's say the United States decides to withdraw 20 or 22,000 troops out of Europe. And this is what the Pentagon is discussing currently. The Germans are going to say, okay, well, necessity now arises for us to spend even more on our military. Let's do 5%. Let's do 6% GDP, something like that. Russia is forming a 1 million man army. Boom, we got to make a German 1 million man army. We got to get money. We got to spend money on recruitment ads. We got to boost the charisma to get German militarism back. Bring the band back together. And this is what they want to do. So it says here that while a welcome boost to the Bundeswehr and German defense industry, perhaps, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it says here, okay, I've already read this. So here's the last paragraph here. It says, so while Germany's newest chancellor does not yet hold office, it is clear that Germany's industrial might will soon be put to the test of reequipping and rearming the moribund German Bundeswehr. Ooh. Reminds me of what happened after World War I. You see, after World War I, the German military was very weak. It didn't have a military. And whatever remnants of the military were left were completely under the control of the United States. And the United States limited the number of troops that Germany could have. The United States said Germany cannot have a general staff. The United States immensely limited the size of the German Navy. So the Germans were under the control of the U.S., just like they're under the control of the U.S. right now. But the Germans were secretly rebuilding their military under the Weimar government. Then Hitler took power, and he said, we're not even going to keep it a secret anymore. We're going to show the whole world that we are rebuilding our military. The amount of time between World War I and World War II was, what, almost 2 decades? And the reason why it didn't take very long was because there were no nuclear weapons. That was the reason why. The moment nuclear weapons entered the equation was the moment that Europeans said, okay, let's back away from this war thing. Because of nuclear weapons. The Russians had them, the Americans had them, and so the Europeans said, okay, let's take a break. And that's why we had all these decades of peace. That's why we've had 8+ decades of peace since the end of World War II. It's because of nuclear weapons. So the reason why not a lot of time passed between World War I and World War II was because there were no nuclear weapons. Everybody was just expecting, everybody knew it was going to be tanks and airplanes and bullets and trenches. No one expected a nuclear bomb to be dropped on Japan unless you were amongst those who were planning the nuclear bombing of Japan. Once nuclear weapons entered the equation, it commenced an unprecedented era of peace that we are now gradually leaving. what happens when other countries start getting nuclear weapons? What happens if Germany gets a nuclear weapon or nuclear weapons? What happens when Japan gets nuclear weapons? Then the playing field is leveled. And Germany could go to war with Russia, and Germany could say, hey, you drop a nuke on us, we're dropping a nuke on you. You want to do this? You want to play this game? And if there is a war between the Germans and the Russians, they will keep it conventional for a certain duration of time, lest they go nuclear, because they wouldn't want to go nuclear. They'll keep it conventional. What happens when conventional warfare is utterly exhausted? That's when things are really going to get ugly. Now, I want to show you guys this article on Rheinmetall. This is very interesting. Rheinmetall is Europe's biggest defense company. It's a huge company, and their stocks have blown up recently. They have boosted tremendously. Why? Because of the revival of militarism. It's very obvious. And people say, Ted, Germany's not going to come back. It's not going to come back. Aren't these the same people who always say follow the money and look at the stock market? That's going to tell you everything. Okay, why is Rheinmetall stock increasing precipitously? Why? Why is there this precipitous explosion, boom in Rheinmetall stock? Why? And this is happening while Volkswagen is suffering. Well, Volkswagen is suffering, but Rheinmetall is thriving. Why? Why? Because of the revival of militarism. I mean, this is very simple. Rheinmetall CEO expects order book to balloon by 450% amid Germany military boom. As 2024 came to an end, the German arms contractor Rheinmetall was toasting an order book that had reached a record of 55 billion euros, 63 billion USD. In 5 years' time, the sum will look like pocket change. See, so they were celebrating the fact that they made 55 billion euros, and now they're saying, listen, in the future, that 55 billion euro, it's going to be pocket change. We're going to make a lot more money. And the CEO of Rheinmetall said recently that he expects that $1 trillion is going to be spent on German military industry. Now, we'll get to that in a moment here in the article. Papperger, that's the CEO's last name, Armin Papperger. Papperger said he expected orders to hit 300 billion euro, 340 billion in the next 5 years, equivalent to around a 450% increase. Papperger's optimistic spending outlook is incumbent on a newly hawkish Europe upping the ante on defense spending. The bloc recently committed to spend around 800 billion euro, $910 billion on defense. That's huge, guys. That is huge. Papperger, though, thinks this figure could be closer to 1 trillion euro, equivalent to 1.1 trillion USD. That is... I wish people could be more astute. I don't want to say intelligent or whatever. I wish people could be more astute. When I tell people Germany's going to come back, I've been saying this since early 2016. That's when I started. I think it was in the winter of 2016. Basically January, somewhere around, or maybe March. It was early 2016. And I said, Germany's coming back. Do you know how many people believed me? One of the very few people who expressed agreement to me was some dude in Serbia. And the only reason why he agreed with me was because Serbia suffered under the Austrians and the Germans. So he understood this. He said, yeah, they're going to come back. Absolutely. They want to come back. Plus, back in the 1990s, the Germans were backing the KLA. So the Serbs, they got a firsthand experience of good German culture. And so people say, oh, that's not true. That's not true. Guys, it's very simple. It's very simple, okay? People talk about, oh, the rise of Iran. Oh, the rise of this country. Iran is one of the poorest countries in the world. It's not dirt poor, but it's poor, relatively speaking. Their economy is shot, not doing very good. Germany is the fourth biggest economy in the world. When you have that much money, you can make a powerful military. And I don't need to be Elon Musk to figure that out. It's very, very simple. I'm not a super educated person. I don't consider myself to be a very intelligent person. But when I see fourth biggest economy, I know, oh, they have the capacity to make a powerful military. If you spend $1 trillion or €1 trillion on your military, you can make a very powerful military. All that is needed in this recipe is spirit. You got the body, but how do you animate the spirit? Or sorry, you have the body, how do you animate the body? How do you animate the flesh? Spirit. So all that is needed is charisma. And you can follow through with a very serious and efficient German military policy. Trillion. Yeah, that's very serious. But yet you still have the naysayers who say, oh, it's not going to happen. Oh, Theodore, you're crazy. It's all bullshit. People are full of shit, and they refuse to see the obvious. So it says here that in addition to a €500 billion infrastructure investment pledge, the country's commitment to fresh defense spending could see the country shell out more than $1 trillion, 1.3 trillion USD of spending in the coming years. You hear that? The country could shell out more than €1 trillion in the coming years. That's huge. And they have the industrial culture. That's the thing. You have to understand, it's not just about money. I could give $1 trillion to Uganda, and Uganda will still be a dump. You have to also factor in culture. Does it have an industrial culture? Yes, Germany has an industrial culture. They have the money. They have the industrialness. All they need is the charisma. And you're talking about a very dangerous recipe. So it says here that because of Germany's early aspirations of making an outsized commitment to defense spending, Paperger expects his company to play a bigger role in European rearmament. And that is definitely true, because currently Rheinmetall is the biggest defense company in Europe. It's huge. So it says here that shares in the company have already risen more than 140% this year, having increased by 1,000% since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So it's not stopping, right? Russia invaded Ukraine 2022. The stock for Rheinmetall has increased by 1,000% ever since. It continues to increase. It went up by 140% this year. It doesn't stop. This train don't stop. It's not going to stop. In addition to fresh aggregate demand across Europe, Rheinmetall may also hope to replace. Now check this out. This is interesting. Check this out. In addition to fresh aggregate demand across Europe, Rheinmetall may also hope to replace imports of U.S. manufactured arms. So they want to replace American weaponry with German weaponry. In other words, let's bring back the Reich. People don't believe me. People can naysay all they want, but as time goes on, it becomes more and more clear what we are dealing with. The fog is dissipating. More than 60% of European NATO members' weapons imports between 2020 and 2024 came from the States. In March, MBDA CEO Eric Beranger told the Financial Times that the company was receiving more... Now check this out. This is interesting. So this European defense company, MBDA, its CEO, Eric Beranger, told the Financial Times that the company was receiving more calls from European militaries seeking to buy non-US made weapons. So what's happening? Pan-Europeanism, pan-Germanism. Let's stop buying all these American weapons. Let's stop being dependent on the Americans. And let's make Europa great again. And the Nazis had a conception of this idea, but believe it or not. The Nazis didn't just talk about Deutschland. They also talked about European civilization and how they were the defenders of European civilization. And Hans Frank, the Nazi governor who ruled Poland, when he was ruling Poland, he did an interview with some newspaper, and he said, I am here to bring civilization to the Poles. And we are here to bring civilization to the Slavs. Pan-Europeanism. Let's no longer be dependent on America's defense industry. Let's buy German weapons. Let's buy French weapons. We're actually seeing the fruit of this. Check this out. I found this today on Polish media. Look at this, guys. We're seeing it transpiring as we speak. We see it transpiring already. Check this out. This was published recently by the Polish publication called Kresy, which is a great news site if you want to get updated on European news / Polish news specifically. And it says here that, hold on, I got to read this comment. They should rename themselves to Rheinmetall. That is brilliant. That is brilliant. That's a brilliant joke. They should replace to Rheinmetall. France and Germany are building a tank of the future together. I wonder why. I thought that it was just going to be dependence on the US and no, they want to make their own European tank. France and Germany are building a tank of the future together. A new company has been established. Ooh. I did not outline this article, but it's very short, so we're just going to read through it. A new Franco-German company, MGCS project company GmbH, has been established in Cologne to be responsible for implementing one of the most important armament projects in Europe, the constitution of a tank of the future, as part of the main ground combat system program. This project aims to replace the currently used Leopard 2 and Leclerc tanks by 2040. Ooh, 2040, like the 1940s. I've heard this before, and I think this is true. Ukraine was just a big laboratory. It was a testing ground, like Gaza. Ukraine has been a big testing ground to test NATO weapons. Let's test the Abrams and let's see how all these NATO tanks do in a war against Russian tanks. And the Leopard 2, from what I understand, fell short. It did not do very well. So the Germans said, okay, let's go back to the drawing board and let's make something efficient. What the Ukraine war really taught us was that it's very important to have your military spending in order. It's very important to have a serious military spending policy. And it's also very important that you have efficient tanks that can fight in Europe, that can be used on the European battlefield against a Russian military. And what the war in Ukraine showed was that the Russians can do pretty well fighting NATO weapons, like tanks, NATO tanks. And so it looks like the Germans got back in the drawing board and they talked with the French and they said, let's make a better tank. So it says here, the establishment of the company is another milestone in the development of MGCS. The joint decision to establish it was made by the leaders of the industry giants, KNDS Deutschland, KNDS France, Rheinmetall, there's that company again, and Thales. So we're seeing Rheinmetall really being at the forefront of this revival of military industrialization. It says here that the new entity will become the main industrial contractor for the next stage of work on the future combat platform. The MGCS project was initiated by the governments of France and Germany and has been a symbol of European ambition in the field of defense from the beginning. Its goal is to create a new modular company platform that will be not only a new generation tank, but also a basis for other types of vehicles, including artillery and armored personnel carriers. So MGCS is basically an amalgamation of different companies: KNDS Germany, KNDS France, Rheinmetall, and Thales. So it's an amalgamation of different European companies, and it says here that its goal is to create a new modular combat platform that will be not only a new generation tank, but also a basis for other types of vehicles. So this platform, this project, is going to be a model or a basis, a foundation for the creation of not just tanks, but other military vehicles, artillery, etc. And it says here that although the program officially launched several years ago, its development was not without its challenges. Differences in approaches to task division and vision of the final product caused tension between the partners, and the project itself moved slowly for a long time. So they started working on this project before the Russians invaded Ukraine. And of course, they had Russia on their minds when they were doing this whole thing. Any sort of talk about reindustrialization is always done with the intention of fighting Russia. The whole thing is about Russia. It's not about ISIS. It's not about Muslims. It's not about Houthis. It's Russia. That's the big threat. And so it says here, in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, KNDS presented the MGCS technology demonstrator to the Eurostatory exhibition. Although not yet a finished prototype, the vehicle presented, built from a combination of a modernized Leclerc turret and a Leopard TA-7 chassis, showed that the future of European armored forces could look like. The cooperation within the project is currently divided in the proportion 1/3 of the task for each of the parties, blah, blah, blah. So there you go. I don't need to read any more of this. But it's very obvious what's happening. They want to make their own tank. They want to put no limits on military spending. I mean, it's very obvious what's happening, right? European militarism. German militarism. The band is coming back. And then we have the AfD party on top of all this, and they're essentially a repackaged Nazi party. The future is going to be very gray, to say the least. Germany has large immigration base as well. If they can be rallied, Theo does have a point. True. Yeah. And believe it or not, they are here's another interesting thing that no one talks about. There are millions of Turks. There's about, I want to say 3 million Turks living in Germany. That's a substantial population. I think the Turks are the biggest ethnic minority in Germany. And what did the AfD do recently? The AfD recently stated that Turks in Germany should vote for the AfD because that's what Kemal Ataturk would do. So they're already flirting with the Turks. And see, people are so, I don't know, they're so oblivious, I think. Because they'll say, well, Turkey is Muslim and there's Turks in Germany, and so we need the nationalists to save Germany from the Turks and the Oh, but your glorious nationalist party, the AfD, just flirted with the Turkish population in Germany, saying Turks should vote for the AfD because that's what Ataturk would have done. And if the AfD takes full power, or really if any, because the AfD may be gone, the AfD may get replaced by an even more extreme party. Who knows? But if Germany goes full nationalist, it's not going to abandon Turkey. It's not going to say, okay, we're nationalist, let's bring the Polish winged hussars, and let's have Christendom back. That's not going to happen. That's bullshit. If you believe that, then you're living in X. You're living in La La Land, some weird Christian LARPing Facebook page or whatever. Because you cannot ignore geopolitics. You can't. Are the Germans going to say, oh, Turkey, yeah, we don't give a shit about the Dardanelles. Nah, we don't care about that. That access into the Dardanelles, from the Dardanelles into the Mediterranean Sea, nah, we don't care about that. Geopolitics will still exist. And the Germans are not going to want Russia to have any sort of unlimited access into the Mediterranean. So the Germans are going to have to support the Turks, because that's the country that controls the access into the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. So even if you have an ultra-nationalist party taking over Germany, there's still going to be a Turco-German alliance. That's not going to change, because that was the case when Otto von Bismarck ruled. That was one of the first things that Bismarck did when he formed the country of Germany, the modern state of Germany. He made an alliance with the Ottoman Empire, World War I, World War II. The Germans had an admiration for the Turks. Nothing's changed. That's not going to change. So imagine you have a remilitarized Germany, German ultranationalism, and an alliance between Germany and Turkey.